What happened?
Someone set up us the bomb. We get signal.
What?
Main screen turn on.
It's you.
How are you, gentlemen? All your base are belong to us. You are on the way to destruction.
What you say?
You have no chance to survive, mate, your time. Ha ha ha. All your base, all your base, are belong to us. All your base, all your base, are belong to us. All your base, all your base, are belong to us. All your base, all your base, are belong to us. All your base, all your base, are belong to us. All your base,
Hello, everyone. This is Geno Cuddy coming at you at 12:57 a.m. on Thursday, December 12th, 2019. A whole bunch of 12s going on here. 12/12/2019, 12:57. Today, I just figured I'd just like shoot the breeze and just talk about a film that I really, really enjoyed, and that is the 1929 surrealist masterwork, Chien Andalou, directed, produced by Luis Bunuel and Salvador Dali. Um, for those of you who don't know, Chien Andalou is a 1929 silent film, surrealist motion picture. And if I were to describe in detail what transpires in the film, you'd probably be left dumbstruck. It's a film that you actually do have to see to believe. Let me just give you to film fans, this is the film that opens up with the famous shot of a woman's eyeball being sliced by a straight razor. But that's not, the even the crux of like some of the off the wall imagery that's present throughout the interim of the film. There's let me think here. There's the probably one of the more off the wall or one of the most risque pieces of film contained within this production is when Pierre Bacheff's character starts groping Simone Mariol. First, he grabs her bosom and starts, fondling and caressing her bosom and drooling while he does it and being like, oh yeah, and then, through the magic of film technology, her bosom transforms into her bottom, her butt, her derriere, if you will. And he starts fondling that, and he goes, ooh, yeah. And it's just like one of those films that's like just so off the wall insane. I mean, let me just give you a for instance here. We were when I was in high school, we were doing an art course, and we were studying the works of Dali and the surrealists, and I said, hey, I got this film, Un Chien Andalou from '29, that he did with Luis Bunuel. It was one of his very first efforts, and I was talking to the art teacher, and she wanted to preview it first to make sure it was appropriate. And within the first 5 minutes, she was like, "Nah, fuck this. I'm not showing this." I mean, come on. I mean, it's high school. I mean, my freaking civics and law teacher showed a movie called Gridiron Gang, and with a whole bunch of violence in it. We can't take a little bit of some guy grow up at a girl's tits in a movie. I mean, come on. It's messed up. It's messed up. The whole school system is messed up. Where if you could show a film like Gridiron Gang in school, and you can't show a film like with Chien Andalou in school, there's something wrong there. But anyway, I first discovered this film in a book on cinema. back when I was 7 years old. This was again during the time when I was going to libraries pretty much all the time and researching and reading as much as I could to try to get over, as much as I could at least, the then recent death of my father. Um, and, just trying to research and study up and, keep my mind focused on, other things, instead of, the recent sadness that unfolded. So it all began with the Marx Brothers, of course. And then, I started reading about other films. And I got this huge, huge book on cinema, I think published by DK Press. I'm not even sure if they're even in business anymore. But it was a huge, huge coffee table book. And very a thick, thick volume. And so I took that home and I was, leafing through it, and I saw this one image in the year 1929 because they covered films from like the late 1890s up until like 2004. So as you can imagine, this is a pretty thick volume, and all the articles were written in the form of a then current day newspaper article. Very, very well done. I liked the presentation of it. And when I got to the year 1929, I noticed this image of this eyeball being sliced by razor, and I was like, "What the hell is this? This looks fascinating." And I was reading through the text, and I found out it was this film called Un Chien Andalou from 1929, and it was directed by Luis Bunuel and Salvador Dali. And I says, "Oh my goodness, I have to, get a copy of this film. I have to see it." So of course, through my interlibrary loan system that I used to have, I wound up snagging a copy of this, took it home, and watched it. And and again, mind you, I was 7 years old when I was watching this, and so my jaw was on the floor watching this. I was like, "What the hell is this? He's touching this girl's bazooms. He's there are dead donkeys on top of this piano. Her armpit hair got transplanted on his face. And as I was watching this and watching, the events unfold in front of me, I was, I was at first shocked. And I think that was the reaction that Bunuel was going for when he originally released this thing. From what I understand, the original release of this film, I think now, I could be mistaken, but I think that it took place at the Studio 28 in Paris. And Bunuel, when they ran the film, he was actually in the back running records. Since again it was a silent film, he had records set up to sync up with the film. And he was playing like old Argentinian tangos and Tristan and Isolde and old Wagner pieces. And he had beside him in his hands a bunch of rocks, a bunch of stones that he had collected from outside. Because if he knew that if the audience was going to be shocked or stunned and start making disgusting sounds, like they were disgusted and appalled by what they were seeing on the screen, he was going to run out there and start throwing these rocks at them, and stone the audience, you know. Uh, Bunuel was just such a madman in that regard. I mean, one of his last things that he ever said when he was on his deathbed was, "Thank God I'm an atheist." Very, very, whimsically off the walls individual. And but unfortunately for Bunuel, the audience wound up falling in love with the film, and he just wound up silently discarding the rocks in a rock pile just outside the theater. And again, while I was watching this, I was taken aback by it. Certainly, I thought it was like, well, again, what the hell am I watching? And I've actually said that quite a few times watching films. Most recently, when I viewed the Olsen and Johnson vehicle Hell's a Poppin' from 1941, which is a film that I think deserves greater recognition and bigger discussion. So I'll save that for another time. Um, but getting back to Bunuel and Dali and Chien Andalou, apparently Bunuel and Dali had met at an art school in Madrid, and they had a friend of theirs, the poet Federico Garcia Lorca, and they were like anarchists. You know, they would go out and pull these wild stunts that nobody had ever seen before. You know, again, artists pushing the envelope, which is, you know, big stickler for me. I love it when artists do that. And so Federico Garcia Lorca, he had this girlfriend, and they would all dress her up like a prostitute, and she would get on a speeding train, and at each stop, somebody new would get on this train, and so she got on first, and you know, again, you know, this is a public thing. You know, there are people on this train, you know, watching all this in action here. So just keep that in mind going in. Um, and so this prostitute, or this woman dressed up to look like a prostitute, gets on this train, and she's you know, looking very she's tramping it up, pretty much. And then on the next stop, Dali and Lorca uh, dress up as two priests, and they get on this train, and you know they start molesting this young girl, fondling her, touching her, making sexual remarks in her direction, and the people who are just sitting there are appalled and taken aback by this. Like, what the hell's going on? And then on the very last stop, Bunuel would get on the train dressed as a policeman. And he would start beating the living daylights out of these priests with his club and say, "Why that? Get the hell off of this train, you priests! You know, why are you always bothering these poor young prostitutes? Can't you just see they're trying to make a living?" And then they'd all get off the train and they'd all wind up laughing about it and go and have a drink at the pub afterwards. You know, that was just the kinds of guys that these guys were. You know, they pushed the envelope. They did things that nobody expected. I mean, when Chien Andalou made its premiere uh, and started going all around the world, it eventually found its way to Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin, of course, being the famous film comedian. I don't think I need to. I think Charlie Chaplin is a big enough uh, pop culture icon that I don't need to get into who he is. But for those of you who don't know, he's a classic silent film comedian and most famous for the character the Little Tramp. That's why Google exists, folks, and your local library, most importantly. Um, so Chaplin had a copy of Un Chien Andalou, and he loved it immensely. He thought it was one of the best pieces of filmmaking he had ever seen. And so he had this. He ran it constantly in his projection room, and he had an Asian projectionist. And whenever this Asian projectionist would play this real film, and it got to the eyeball slicing scene, he Chaplin would always hear a thump in the back of the projection room because the Asian projectionist fainted when he saw it. Uh, and then Chaplin would have to go in the back room and revive the dude. And this was every single time. So Chaplin wound up contacting Bunuel and inviting him over to have Christmas dinner with him and all of his friends. And Bunuel thought this was very bourgeois and very stupid. And so he invited his friend with him. And when Bunuel got to the house, he saw that there was a big Christmas tree there. And underneath all the Christmas tree was a whole bunch of packages. And while they were sitting at dinner, Bunuel made a statement to his friend that when I take out my handkerchief at the end of the meal, we're gonna go to the tree and we're really gonna spice things up. So, as it happened, Bunuel takes out his handkerchief at the end of the meal, and he and his friend go to the tree. They smash the tree down, they bust the tree up, and then they start stomping on all the packages. And then they wound up having a huge laugh and wound up going to a pub and drinking. And Chaplin, of course, being the good sport that he was, he wound up calling Luis Bunuel the other day, saying, "Luis, come back home, come back to my home, and everything's all right. I'm not mad. But come over to my house." And so Bunuel did, and when Bunuel walked in, he noticed that there was a Christmas tree there and a bunch of packages, and Chaplin said, "Now, Louis, we're not going to be able to get down to some heavy duty drinking unless you bust this tree down and break all the packages." And after that, Bunuel had a profound respect for Chaplin. So yeah, with Chien Andalou, one of the most insane, off the wall surrealist films you'd ever want to see, but it's a classic today. I mean, again, you have to realize that this was produced by Luis Bunuel and Salvador Dali, the famous surrealist painter. But it's just a shame that, the relationship between the two of them was short lived, because I could imagine, the films that they could have made. I mean, they did make a film, I think in 1930, called L'Âge d'Or, or The Golden Age. And that film was actually a feature. When Chien Andalou was only about 15 minutes in length. So when you go and look this up, it's not going to take up too much of your time at all, really. It's a really, really short film. And it's well worth your while if you're at all a fan of Salvador Dali. You owe it to yourself to watch this, and L'Âge d'Or as well. But unfortunately, Dali proved to be kind of a scumbag later on in life. Let's just say it like that. He wound up making up stories about Bunuel and almost having Bunuel blacklisted as a communist just to sell his book. Making very serious accusations, and when Bunuel would approach Dali about this, he would say, "Oh, this wasn't about you. This is about me. I just wanted to sell my book." And I think this is around the same time as well that Dali had unfortunately met his wife Gala, who wound up destroying his life. Because from then on, Dali became a very commercial person. I mean, he could have been a counterculture icon, really, if he had stayed within that purview. I mean, he went commercial, and that's the bad. It would almost be like if Frank Zappa went into glam metal. That's almost what this was kind of like. It would be like if Frank Zappa wound up writing songs for Kiss and wound up coming out with a pop metal album. That's how bad this was. And of course, Bunuel and Dali, they never spoke to each other again after that. And Dali died in the hospital, surrounded by vultures who just wanted his autograph, and he didn't get to die with dignity. He died of tubes in his nose and everything, but he chose, to go that way. It was just a shame that he wound up turning out to be the type of person that he was, and wound up being consumed by fame and his wife, and it's like it's like that old statement: if the wine don't get you, the women will. And unfortunately, the women got Dali. Sorry to say, but that's pretty much what happened to him. And whatever happened to Bunuel, well, he wound up actually having a pretty successful film career. He made a lot of great films in the 70s, actually. Belle de Jour, That Obscure Object of Desire. A lot of great, wonderful, weird films that I, again, highly recommend people checking out. I think Bunuel is one of the most underrated of the classic era filmmakers. He created some really magical films and some weird films too. And the thing about Bunuel that you have to realize is that you have to, I've described him, and up until now, you probably thought that the guy was a total nutcase. And there are clearly defined reasons for that. I think it's because Bunuel, he grew up in Colanda, Spain, And Calanda was this little village in the middle of nowhere in Spain, and it was stuck in the Middle Ages when Bunuel was growing up. I mean, they only had one car in the whole village, and it was an old, broken down piece of crap car, pretty much. And it was like everything around them was like 15th century, and they were still doing everything by hand and everything else. While we over in the United States were moving up, and technology was bustling, and everybody was driving like Model Ts and stuff. They were still driving horses and stuff over there, so it was like a third world country, pretty much. And the whole thing, with Bunuel and sex, in his films is that he didn't get exposed to a lot of that. I think he was a sexually promis. I think he was a promiscuous young man, and he was very very curious about it. But unfortunately, there wasn't a lot out there at the time because Calanda, in addition to being stuck in the Middle Ages, was also very very conservative. And so, for example, I think a buddy of his found these old magazines of, what they presumed to be pornography because you could see slightly up the woman's ankle. And that was enough to get these guys aroused because they had never seen anything like this before. I mean, it's not like today where you can easily go on the internet and, like pull up pornography instantly, like at the drop of a hat. No, these guys, they found these magazines that showed slightly above a woman's ankle, and that was enough to get them going. And that's why sex is a big part of a lot of Bunuel's films because he wasn't able to express it in a certain way, so he brought it out in his art. All that stuff that was contained within him, he brought out in his artwork. He brought out in his filmmaking, and that's why a lot of his films are sexual in nature because he was just so self-contained as a young lad growing up in Spain that he had to unleash that somehow, you know. And I'm going to make a statement here that's actually a little that could be contrived as a little controversial, but I don't think you could be a good artist if you're a rationally sane person. I really don't. You have to have some mania within you to be a really good artist. And you know, honestly, I pity the people who who are normal, who are common, who are rationally sane, because they're never going to be able to create art that goes outside the general area. They're never going to be able to go outside the box there. I mean, guys like myself, I admit it, I'm screwy. I have a few screws loose. Guys like Bunuel, Dali, Man Ray, another great surrealist. Um, Morneau, Lang, a lot of these guys, and a lot of them had like mania, and a lot of them, were a little off the wall, and were very visionary and thought outside the box. I think nowadays people are still self-contained, that they're afraid to push the limits, push the envelope, make anything that actually resembles art. I mean, I think at least in filmmaking, I can't speak to other forms of art, but I think in at least filmmaking, we've gotten too comfortable with the idea of Marvel and superhero DC Comics films. I think that films like that really need to go away because I really would like to see a return to more artful displays of filmmaking and like really bring yourself out into your work like Bunuel did. I mean, you can say all you want about when Chien Andalou, you can say it's the most perverted, twisted piece of filmmaking you'd ever want to see, but hey, it was an embodiment of the man. The man put himself into that work. Like when you watch that, you're watching a Bunuel film. He put everything. I mean, hell, he's even in the fucking thing. He's the one who slashes the woman's eyeball at the beginning of the film. He's the one with the razor at the beginning of the film, and you never see him again except for in that one scene. And the film shifts from time period to time period to time period without any logic or reason. And the great thing about Un Chien Andalou too is the fact that you watch it because it's a silent film and because it's a very abstract piece of filmmaking. There's no real linear story. You could derive any interpretation you want from it. I mean, people have surmised that the sequence in which Pierre Bachev's character hoists the pianos with the dead donkeys and the priests and all that. People have described that as like religion and art and everything holding this man back from having the love that he wants. But Bunuel, when he made the film, he had no literal interpretations like that. He said that this is just shit that came to my mind one night, you know? I mean, this is stuff that him and Dali were sitting in a restaurant and they were brainstorming about all this. You know, this wasn't, was, none of this stuff was ever meant to be taken, you know, in a literal sense. They never meant to be analyzed. But over the course of, I don't know, like 90 years since the film has been released, you know, people have been making their interpretations, have analyzed the film to death and said, why is that happening? You know, what was going through Bunuel's mind? You know, there must be a reason for this. There was no reason for anything. As a matter of fact, I think there was a quote from Bunuel that said, if we did things in Un Chien Andalou without any reason or circumstance. We just threw whatever we thought of on the screen up to the audience, and if they liked it, great. If they didn't, fuck them. You know, pretty much that was his mindset. Um, and that's why I love the film. I think it's a great piece of filmmaking because of that, because of its devil may care attitude. I wish again that today's filmmakers would return to, you know, that style of filmmaking where they just threw everything in but the kitchen sink. I mean, another film. I mean, I brought it up earlier. That is highly recommended just because of that would be the 1941 Olsen and Johnson comedy Hell's a Poppin'. It's a marvelous piece of surrealist filmmaking. At least the first 10 minutes of it are off the wall insane and marvelously well done. I it makes the Marx Brothers look tame by comparison. That's how off the wall insane this film is. Um, Again, great film, highly recommended. But in Chien Andalou, again, it's one of those films that I really enjoy. I think it's, you know, I think if you're at all a fan of movies or want to make movies, you owe it to yourself to sit down and view the film at least once. You know, because it's been used because a lot of the imagery is like in the common lexicon now. I mean, there was even a colorized version that MTV put out back in the '80s that they used to air on their network all the time. And there's the punk band, the Pixies. If you guys remember the Pixies, the punk band, they came out with a song about the making of when Chien Andalou called Debaser. I got me a movie. I want you to know I'm slicing up eyeballs. Whoa ho ho ho. That's all about the making of Bunuel's Un Chien Andalou. It inspired a punk rock song. And it's still inspiring artists today. I just wish that Hollywood, would, get its head out of its own ass and start making, films that have an artistic merit instead of films that are just going to make money. See, that's the problem that I've had with Hollywood for years is that, I think that they just make these films just to make money. There's no artistic merit in a Marvel movie. There's no artistic merit in a DC Comics movie. At least not to me. I think a lot of that stuff is culturally and artistically vapid. It does nothing for me. All they are just a bunch of CGI imagery and a bunch of beat 'em ups and all, and it's like, I don't need that. I don't need that in my cinema. Thank you very much. I'd rather see, somebody put themselves into their film, like Bunuel did with this, or like Hitchcock did with a lot of his films. I mean, you watch every single Hitchcock film, not only does Hitchcock make a cameo, but you could feel the man through his filmmaking. Like, it's almost like you're sitting there and having a meal with Hitchcock because you're watching this film. You could almost, feel yourself entering into his mind, like a being John Malkovich type of situation there. Same thing with Lang, Murnau, Chaplin, a lot of the great classic filmmakers. So at the end of the day, I do highly recommend you guys going and checking out Un Chien Andalou. I think it's one of the best films ever made. Certainly one of the best short films ever made, if not of all time. And if you have time as well to spare, check out their follow-up feature, 1930s L'Age d'Or. It's a shame that film partnership only lasted for 2 films, but dash it off. If those 2 films aren't some of the best films ever made, I highly recommend you guys checking those out. Very, very good. Well, anyway, I've been going on for a little long here. It's about to be 30 minutes I've been recording, so I better sign off for tonight. It's 1:25 a.m. on Thursday, December 12th, 2019. This has been Geno Cuddy. This has been Cuddy's World. I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and I hope you all have a great night. Thanks so much.